March 2015. We have a special treat this morning. Every few years, we don't do it all the time, every few years we gather together some of our most important treasures, and then some of our local historians that have lived here their entire lives and not only know the history of Cedar Key, but have had the opportunity to live a lot of this history and are willing to share it with us. This morning, our guest speakers are in order from left to right: Dr. John Andrews, Ms. Thelma McCain, Brenda Coulter, and Ms. Frances Hodges. And if you know anything about Cedar Key, you know all these people already, so they don't really need an introduction. A couple of things I did want to mention. Those of you who are not yet members of the Historical Society, we have applications at the front door. Just a reminder, our annual meeting is this evening and held right here from 6 o'clock until 9, until 8. And we have some lovely calendars for a small donation. Now, I grant you they are 1999 calendars, but they have some fantastic historical pictures in them. And not that we're in terrible need, but it's an opportunity. For a $2 donation, you can have one of these calendars. We have a few of them left over from 1999. So, I think everybody's aware we have cookies and coffee. Help yourself and enjoy the program. So, without further ado, we have our senior lecture this morning. Enjoy.
I'm not sure we need this, but we may, since we have quite a crowd and some of them are sitting pretty far back. What we thought we'd do is just very briefly tell you what part of town we lived in when we were growing up as kids. And the main thing we want to do is open the floor for questions. And I think that will lead to a lot of discussion about how things were back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and how they've changed since that time. So I grew up in the down where the Cinnamoreville condominiums are located, where the fiber and brush factory was, that my dad built and ran from 1910 to 1952. So I'll be able to answer questions. I'll try to especially answer questions related to that end of town, where the railroad came in, and then on down to the end of the tip of the island there where the condominiums are now. And I'll pass it on to Ms. Thelma McCain.
The only thing I can tell you is I was raised on 5th Street. That was right next to this 6th Street over here, but it wasn't 5th Street then. And to me, that was the most wonderful place in the world. All of our black people lived on this street and over here, and we loved them and played with them and didn't know they were different. We called all of them aunt and uncle, and we went to school cut through their yards and went to school. You have to ask me something in the 50s and 60s, because I don't know much about the 30s. I never rode a train or anything like that. I knew about it from my aunts, my older aunts who had ridden a train, but I don't know much about the train stuff. But you can ask me whatever you want to about anything else.
Well, I guess I'm the youngest of this bunch, not by much. I was the only one of my mother's children to be born in Gainesville. The others were born right here, delivered by Dr. Turner. We all grew up in the house, which is now located behind the Island Jiffy, still there. And I graduated from high school in 1962, and I went away to college. I returned home in 1979, and I taught 34 years in the Lee County school system, retired in 2008. When people ask me what it was like to grow up in the 50s and the 60s when we didn't have anything but the fishing industry and whatever, and I remind those people that we lived in Cedar Key when it truly was a paradise. We had the freedom of all the islands. Our parents didn't worry about us because we truly were children of a village. So whatever you did on the east end of town, or the north end of town, or the south end of the town, whatever misdeed that was could beat you home, usually. So, but we really did have a wonderful place to grow up and to learn and to go away and then come back, and many of us come back and enjoy a wonderful life today.
Well, unfortunately, I was not born here, but I feel like an adopted native. My grandparents and my great-grandparents all were here. I'm related to the Schlimmers and the Crevasses. But I came here when I was in the 5th grade, and I lived where the City Hall is now. And we had a lot of fun growing up here. We learned a lot, and we explored a lot, and we swam a lot, and we played basketball a lot. And that, that's about it. If y'all have any questions, just ask us. Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things she needs to tell you is all the basketball back then until 1955 was played on an outside basketball court. The kindergarten, pre-K portables sit on that court now, but it was all done outside. And when cold weather arrived, they would put barrels around the corners and build a fire in it for us to stay warm by while they played basketball.
Well, I was born in the Andrews House, which is now part of the Cedar Key Historical Museum. And I was a home delivery, of course, and it was my Uncle George that delivered me, my dad's brother, who was a physician, who had moved to Cedar Key from Muncie, Indiana. And he was the one that delivered me in Andrews House. And the house was moved back in 1995 from its original site down where the fiber factory was, where the condominiums are now, to its present site, which is next to the original museum building and is now part of the museum. So that, I think, will open the floor for questions, and we'll do our best to answer whatever you're wondering about.
Yes.
I don't know if y'all know the answer to this, but with Ms. Francis talking about basketball, it reminded me of, you know what I'm thinking, Ms. Thelma, don't you? Of a cheer that y'all used to do. Does anybody remember that cheer?
What? Chickalaka?
I think it had something to do about an osprey.
Oh, an osprey.
And maybe I'm wrong.
Not my career as cheerleaders. I don't think we had one about an
Miss
osprey.
Burnett and
Oh, that was the one that Miss Birdie made and Miss Susie Day made up, and I cannot remember it, but me and Doris were the star players of the basketball game. To raise money for the Lioness Club, we played the girls, and they were bad. And my son was one of the referees, and one of the girls scratched me in the face, but I was the one he called the technical on, so things were not good when he got home that day. I think he called walking on Miss Doris, but she wasn't. She was running with the ball, and she shot it at the other end. But we had a lot of fun. We did have a lot of fun doing that.
I would like to know which one of you were in the basketball teams when this occurred. I was in Crystal River in a doctor's office, and the lady beside me said, "Oh, you're from Crystal River?" She said, "My grandfather used to come up and play basketball with Cedar Key, and they would take the boats from Crystal River to Cedar Key." And she said, one time Crystal River won, and said the team threw oyster shells at us as we were leaving.
Before our time. with us when teams crossed number 4 bridge to come here and play. And whether they won or lost, sometimes it was pretty heated, and they had to have a police escort with the school bus out of town.
George?
Yeah, my father-in-law got kind of from Williston, played football for Williston. They said, you had to fight your way in or out, win or lose.
And when you played football in the 40s and the 50s, the field was there at the school, and it was covered with sand spurs. It was covered with sand spurs. So they used to have a sand spur detail, even in my era in the 60s. The boys, girls, everybody had to get out there, start from one end to the other and pull sand spurs before football season, or try to. But I know stories that we heard in past generations that several of those boys played football barefooted.
We also.
One of Max,
My brother-in-law never played football with shoes on.
he did, he was an excellent player.
Can you tell us all a little bit about when you were growing up, what the island was like, where the development, where the beaches were, where the streets were? Because I know things have changed.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that's changed is the access to the pier. The train used to come in on Depot Street and access the pier from Depot Street. When the park was established there, they changed the access to the pier to A Street. But when I was growing up, of course, the train had already stopped service in 1932. I was only 3 years old. But when I was growing up, the access to the dock was still from Depot Street, and it was a wooden dock. There were fish houses, commercial fish houses out there. There were about 6 or 7 commercial fish houses on the dock at that time. That was in the 30s and early 40s.
I think the first restaurant on the dock was where the motel sits now as you approach on the west end of the dock. And that was called Skipper Dave's. That was the first restaurant to open.
I thought the first one was Johnson's, Marie and Webster.
I think Skipper Dave's was there before while they were building Johnson's. And Johnson's where Seabreeze is now was the next. Yeah.
And where we went to the beach was you had to come down the hill by where Miss Judy lives. That was a dirt road that went in there because the road around by this road did not go all the way around. Mr. Sterling McKinney built a dock there to put his yacht that went out, and it made a loop, and then it come back, and he put his yacht inside there, but he built us a place where we could swim, and then he built some little huts down there with cabbage man tops so that people could sit and watch their kids, and that was our beach. It's right there by beachfront. But now, Miss Susie Day had some pictures of where you come down the hill from the Baptist church that was a big bathing dock back, I don't know when that was, but it was before my time. And it was a big, big dock where they swam from. They called that the bathing dock, but we called ours the bathing dock because that was the beach that we went to the beach at.
Yeah, that was a long dock, and the house out there,
Yeah.
the building on the dock that you could change clothes in. You could go in with your bathing suit, and change clothes and go swimming, and then come back and dress. There was a story that one of the fellas told that he didn't have a bathing suit, and so he borrowed bathing suit. Two of them went in the house, and he borrowed the other guy's bathing suit, and used it.
But that's where we had our beach at.
But that dock went all the way almost to the channel, and the bottom was sandy. It wasn't muddy like the one down here at the park. It was really fun to swim down there.
Talking about sports, we had a town baseball team back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and we played Archer, we played Chiefland, we played Williston, we played Cross City, we played Crystal River, and a couple of other towns. And the game was every Sunday afternoon, and there was a big turnout for the game. And there were some fights that occurred after and during those games too. And I remember Brenda's uncle that played first base, and he was bad about starting fights. Herschel.
Herschel, yeah.
But we had some great fun playing baseball every Sunday afternoon, and we had some pretty good players. Had a couple of good pitchers and a real good catcher. Jeannie Depew was the catcher, and he could throw on the line to second base without standing up from the sitting position. He was good.
Don Wilder too.
Yeah, we had one arm
Yep.
fellow, Donald Wilder, who was born with only one arm, and he played right field, and he could catch the ball with his glove like this, put his glove underneath his arm was missing from about here down, put it here and take his hand out and get the ball and throw it in just as fast as anyone with two arms. And he had a terrific arm because he was one-armed, you know. So that arm was really strong.
He was bad too, and he
Yep.
could knock it all the way across the highway.
Yeah.
Well, highway in those days, it was a road all the way over to the
Across.
Log cabin.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes, Debbie?
Brenda, can you retell the story that I think your sister and you told me about the house where Bob and Joy Whitney lived on Second, that they put the flags out to tell the weather?
Oh, that was.
Yes, up where the White House Hotel
Yeah.
sat, and the Whitmans lived in
Yeah.
a house up there. You know, we had telegraph and telephone, but for fishermen and all, they used a system of signal flags to announce approaching storms, you know, tropical storms, hurricanes, or whatever. And that the pole for that was up on that hill across from the Baptist church, where the remaining building of the White House Hotel still stands today. Some of you may not realize, unless you've been down to look at some of the photos in the museum, that the White House Hotel was actually two buildings, right, side by side. They were almost identical, I think. And after the 50 hurricane, one of them was, I think, so damaged and left in disrepair, and it was finally torn down in the 80s, or late 70s or early 80s.
70s, because that's what part of my house is built out of.
Her husband that tore it down.
Right. And that is an interesting fact that she brings up about her house. I know of other houses in this community that are built from the recycled materials of homes brought from the Cineota or that were left on the Cineota, or houses, older houses in the community that families had moved away, large homes. And when they were torn down, that material was used for reconstruction of other homes on the island. And that was, you know, what we consider the good old cypress and heart pine. And a lot of those houses are still standing today.
The first one was Uncle George Wadley's house, which is right next to the Methodist parsonage. The man that bought the property, he didn't want the house, but he couldn't move it because there was a great big oak tree, huge tree right in front of it. So the only way we could do that was to tear it down. Then we went to the White House Hotel. Then we went to the Stapleton building, which is in the area where Miss Judy's house is. We tore that one down, and then the last one we did was Miss Bessie Gibbs's house when it burnt. We saved what was out of that, finished our house with it. So it's historical.
It needs to be a plaque from the historical.
We were poor, so we had to do whatever we could to build us a house.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Bob and Laura from Michigan. I've already been told that Michigan's a good place to be from right now, and they're right. But observing all this, listening to it, do I understand correctly that this event, this is where you have all these recollections take place about every 2 years. Is anybody recording this? Is there an opportunity, have you given any thought to, or have you already had a chance to put down your recollections and in a permanent form? Because not only do you have a lot of precious recollections that are not going to be available forever, but I'm hearing all kinds of other people out here that are coming up with their recollections. Has there been any consideration, or have you already done any kind of recording of all this?
Oh, John can answer that. One special project.
There was an oral history program conducted here back in the 80s, I think it was. And then I was involved in some oral history recordings in the early 2000s, late 1990s and early 2000s. And we've had those were cassette tapes, and we've had those digitized. So we do have those records, which are excellent. And I haven't brought it up at our board meeting, but I intend to try to get another oral history program started to record oral history from some natives that, have grown up later, So we do that.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, ma'am?
How many of your ancestors, your children and your grandchildren have remained here in Cedar Key?
All but two. I have
that's
one
how
that,
many?
yes, ma'am, they live real far away. One lives in Chiefland and one made it all the way to Bronx. That's the truth.
The rest of you? The rest of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Family here?
My son lives in Rosewood, and my other son lives in Crystal River, and my daughter lives in Claremont. So they had to leave here, just couldn't make a living.
A lot of my family left, and a lot have returned, after going away for jobs and so on. But, I think we figured out one time 5 generations of the family, we are the 6th generation, some of us still living on the island.
And I've got 4 generations that's still here. But that's all I got.
My family goes way, way back, but I'm the only one left on the island. I had a brother, and he lived in Ocala. And I have 3 daughters. One lives in Louisville, Kentucky, one in Gainesville, Georgia, and the other one in Gainesville, Florida. So none of my children came back. Like Brenda mentioned, there was no work for them here, of course. And a lot of the men that fought in World War II didn't come back either because there was no work for them. The fiber factory closed by that time, and about the only thing to do was commercial fishing. But a lot of their descendants, a lot of them came back after they retired, and but none of mine did, except me.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me what what did that look like during your lifetime?
Well, by the time that I grew up, there was only one house left over there. And there was a caretaker that took care of that house for a few years. My dad actually owned it. And but it was later torn down, I think, after the 1950 hurricane did a lot of damage to it. And since then, there's been no habitation, no houses or anything over there. The cemetery, of course, is still there. And a cousin of mine who inherited the island built that dock that's over at Ceniota with the idea that he was going to try to develop the island. But that all didn't occur, and was finally sold to the state.
I have people that actually lived over there, Crevasses. There were quite a few of them over there.
Yeah, I had family that lived over there too. After the 1896 hurricane had done so much damage over there. There were still some houses that survived that hurricane, and my mother's family lived over there from 1897 to 1903, I believe it was. And my Aunt Ellen was 7 years old when they lived over there, and she was 13 when they left. So she remembered an awful lot about that, and we have her recorded, oral history recorded.
Yes, sir.
Do I understand that some of the houses on First Street were moved over from Cedar?
No. Now, the ones off where Park Place, there were 4 little houses where Park Place condominium is now that were brought over from Cedar. And the first part of the Andrews house was a little 3-room house that was brought over from Cedar. And then after my dad married my mother, he added the second story, and then later on added another addition, so it ended up as a big 2-story house. But the first part of it came from Cedar. But those on First Street were built there by Mr. W.R. Hodges. That was Senator Randolph Hodges' father, and they were built there in the 1920s. They did not come from Cedar. Possibly some of the lumber that was used to build those houses may have come from Cedar, because Mr. Hodges got lumber from houses over there and built the Hodges home. A lot of the lumber, in fact, most of it, I think, of the Hodges home there on Main Street, on 2nd Street, the lumber came from Cedar to build that house.
What kind of work did you guys do when you were growing up as kids?
I did a little bit of everything. I had a paper route. The Jacksonville Journal was an afternoon paper. So when I was about 13, 14 years old, it was an afternoon paper, so I could deliver it, after I got out of school. So I did that for 2 or 3 years, I think. I worked in the Swanee store, which is where it's where the bookstore was.
In the Pelican Realty.
And where Pelican Realty is now. I worked in the Swanee store there delivering groceries on Saturdays. They had a bicycle with a big basket. And so I would deliver groceries with that bicycle with a big basket. And then I worked in the fiber and brush factory in the summer. And see, what else did I do? I was always doing something, always busy. My folks believed in hard work.
I didn't work till 1970. When my youngest son turned 5, I went to work at the captain's table, and I worked there 18 years. And then I left from there and went to work at the school, and that's all I ever did. We just had fun when we were growing up. There wasn't much here to do. I mean, as far as hiring younger people, there wasn't. I mean, most of the restaurants, which we didn't have a lot like we do right now, but I mean, those jobs were for people who were trying to raise their families. And then the crab plant came along, and that employed a lot of women who picked the meat from the blue crabs, and that helped a whole lot. That gave Cedar Key a real boost.
Well, I did what most people did, whatever your parents told you to do. And usually I was underfoot, and I'd rather be at the fish house with my dad and the fishermen and whatever. And I was underfoot so often that my brother and my dad finally bought a small boat and put a 10-horse Evinrude on the back of it and gave me my freedom. And that's what I spent most of my time, even until I graduated from high school, doing. But whatever they asked me to do, I would do. But they preferred I not be underfoot.
And giving her the boat and the motor was the best way to get rid of her, because that's what she liked. She could take that boat anywhere.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun.
Well, I did a lot of fishing too, especially with the cast net. I had a buddy that he and I would, after school, when the tides were right, we'd go mullet fishing with cast nets, and we would catch as many as 100 to 200 pounds in an afternoon, and would sell them to Mr. Eddie Richburg, the fish house, for 10 cents a pound. So we made some good money and also had a ton of fun.
Well, I worked for a little while at Dr. Trevick's drugstore, but I found out that was not a good deal for me. But Mr. P.H. and Susie Day had the question mark, and they had Carmen and Covina, their two first daughters lived there then. And I'd go there and help her, and I'd wash dishes, and I'd iron clothes, and that's what I did. That's about what I did. There wasn't a whole lot of things you could do in Cedar Key in those days. But we had a lot of fun.
Dr. Andrews, there are two things stories that you have told me that I think they might find interesting. One is when you would walk to school, what it used to look like behind Annie's restaurant here. And then also, when Mr. Hodges had his pen behind the house where he had his turtle, and what the boys would do to beat the turtle.
Well,
Did you ever sell him any turtles?
no, yeah, I did.
We got a quarter piece.
Yeah, quarter piece.
Yeah, quarter piece for him.
And
Tell them what
also
kind of
sold
turtle
it.
you're talking about.
Talking about the little diamondback terrapin, it's a small saltwater turtle that was very plentiful back in those days. And Mr. Jules Hodges, who owned the big two-story building where the Capital City Bank is located now, there was a big two-story building there, and Mr. Hodges lived upstairs, and they had a grocery store downstairs. And but he bought these, what we call them, diamondback turtles, and he had a fence. The back of the building was up above ground, and so he put a fence around it and kept those turtles in that fenced-in area there. And he sold them. I guess they were shipped out on the train or by truck later after the train stopped. And they were shipped to New York and were used to make turtle soup in the restaurants in New York City. But he fed them fiddler crabs because he would accumulate, you know, he wouldn't sell all of them right away. So anyway, he fed them fiddler crabs. So the kids would go out, and there were just tons of fiddlers on the beaches at that time. And what we'd do would be put down a tarp and run in a circle around the fiddler crabs and herd them up onto the tarp, and then dump them into a tub and take them. And he'd give us, I think it was either a nickel or a quarter maybe for a bucket full of fiddlers to feed his diamondback turtle.
And tell about behind Annie's place.
Oh yeah, we call that the back beach. Behind Annie's Cafe, that it's all grown up in mangroves now. You can't even see any white sand or anything there. But when we were kids, there had been freezes periodically that would right to the school from where Annie's restaurant is. Right, you know, that big area there that's grown up mostly in mangroves now, but the tide comes in, and you could just follow that beach around and led directly to the school. And so a lot of the kids walked to school on the back beach. Some of us rode bicycles to school. School let out for lunch. We called it dinner. And all the kids went home for dinner. Had an hour for dinner. And so we had time, we all lived close enough that we could either walk or ride a bicycle back and forth to school.
And the one reason we like the back beach is because our parents wanted us to walk the street to school, but we always like to cut across it. We come this street here and caught it and went around to the school, just because we worked.
Right back Jerry's house.
Yeah.
Well, you were on the route.
Yeah.
You were on the route, your house was.
Yes.
Do you have any stories about living through hurricanes or being on the island during a hurricane?
Well, I lived through the 1950 hurricane. That was the year I was to start first grade. And my home, as I told you earlier, was the house that's right behind the Island Jiffy. And that road was not as high, built up as high as it is now. And my father and all of his brothers had to leave the island for a family death in South Carolina. And my mom and my grandmother, who was in her early 80s by that time, were in that house with my brother and my sister. And I know the roof, there was a building over where, you know, on the other side of the house, it had an old tin roof. I can remember the sheets of tin flying off of that. It hit our roof, took some of that roof, and then my aunt's home, which is right next door to it, had a porch. And there was just my aunt and uncle and their young son in that home, and it sat lower than our house. And so I remember my brother, who was a teenager at the time, said, I'm going next door to help Aunt Annalie and Uncle George, you know, to see if I can help them get out to come to our house. It was higher. And just as we could watch him out the window, the tin, as it was blowing, wrapped around the poles of that porch, just as he got in the door and took that whole front porch off that house. But they did manage to get out and eventually come to our house. And during the one of my uncles that was still on the island loaded us all in a truck, my dad's fish truck, and brought, with his wife and his young son, brought us down that road. Water, I would say, was 3 or 4 feet deep on that road. Got us around to where the lunchroom at the school sits now. Those were just a couple of buildings, and the rest of that was open, no buildings at all. And managed to get us all out of the truck and bring us across the football field to the what is now the elementary building, which is the red brick building. And that's where most of the people in town that could manage to get to that building to ride out the rest of the storm. In trying to cross that field, my uncle was holding me and my cousin, but my aunt was holding on to my sister, who was here, and the wind caught her and blew her away from my aunt, totally under one of the buildings, and had to crawl in there, get her out, and bring us to the building. And the rest of the community, a lot of them were already there, and that's where we spent the rest of the 1950 hurricane, watching just to us, total devastation. But we were safe in that building till it was all over, and it was a real mess.
A real mess. Well, I lived where the city hall is at that time, and the Schlemmer house next door, my aunt had just put a new roof on it, and it took 3/4 of the rafters and everything of that roof and blew it over the city hall building and over the street beside it into a vacant lot across, and it just blew it over our house. And the policemen were in the park in the backyard, and they kept watching our roof go kind of up and down, you know, they thought was. So during the lull, what we call the lull, they came in and got us out and took us to the school. But before that, my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather, who was an invalid, and my brother, we were inside the house, and they took down my mother and my grandmother. I was 12 years old then. They took down all the wooden doors inside of the house, and they were wooden doors. They weren't this coarse and stuff, you know. And they propped them up against the front door and the windows as much as they could, and they pushed trunks up against it to hold it. And it's just a miracle. You know, the whole time, no, we didn't really have any warning. We thought, little baby hurricane, you know, coming in here from Yankton, that's what we heard.
Well, there wasn't much technical information like you get today.
But it lasted about 16 hours, and during that time it went through and then came back through. Mm-hmm. So it was, I don't want to ever do that again.
And at that time, we didn't know the hurricanes had names.
They did.
I was an adult before I knew that they called that Hurricane Easy, and nobody seems to understand where did they come up with that name, because they weren't naming hurricanes then, so.
And I think the wind gauge up at Mr. Whitten's probably broke, what, 160 miles
Oh,
an
yeah,
hour?
it was one of those 100-year hurricanes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was a very small hurricane, so it didn't affect much of the rest of the state.
Right.
And it stalled right here. We were in the eye for over an hour. And it backed up then, so that we got the same quadrant of the hurricane twice. And the total time we had hurricane force wind was about 14 hours. So it was,
But one good thing about it, it did not blow the tide in. If it had water, water in front of that wind, we'd all been gone.
yeah.
Cause
It came in
we
just-
just didn't have any water with
We were
any bad
blessed
water.
We were
with that, with
really
the
blessed.
wind and the water we couldn't.
It came in just a little bit south of Cedar Key. And so we had a northeast wind in both times, both halves of the hurricane, we got the same side of it twice. And it was a northeast wind, which blew the tide out instead of giving us the storm surge.
Well, at that time, R.D. and Idabelle Davis were living back behind the bank. And he had a fish house down on the pier. And we had a fence around our yard. And he crawled down there. He grabbed a hold of the fence and he just made himself hold on to the fence as far as he could go, and he crawled down to his fish house during that time to check on him. Because I remember seeing him, when you could see little gusts of whatever. But it was really, really bad. A lot of places, Mr. Quitman's house, he had a 2-story house up there across from Hodges, and it just collapsed. There were several houses that just collapsed.
There were houses across from the market where there's the parking lot now, or the open field. There were little houses all the way up that, including our granddaddy had a 2-story house where there's still a single-story house now. And all of those homes were destroyed. I know the 2-story house was, because that's how he was able to rebuild the little house with the help from the Red Cross.
Our garage was a separate building right behind our house. And it took the roof off of that building and went right over the top of our big 2-story house and landed against the old warehouse, which is now the office for the Fenimore condominiums. The roof of that garage was up against the side of that building. It came right over the top of our 2-story house. And there were sheets of tin, of metal, off the roofs of houses wrapped around telephone poles all over town. And it destroyed about 4 different buildings that were part of the fiber and brush factory. The oil treatment house went down in that hurricane. The building where they made the brushes went down in that hurricane. And the boat supply house went down. So it was...
The Episcopal Church was
yeah.
damaged beyond repair, so that's when they built the block building that's there now. And for some of you help me get these facts right. The bell in the tower of the Episcopal Church is made from all the brass and what's the other material they used to melt down? Anyway, the fishermen all around town collected all the brass that they could, boat parts, whatever, and sent it to Maddox Foundry and Archer to be melted down to make the bell that's in the Episcopal Church.
Most of what the fishermen used was bronze.
Bronze.
Bronze,
Yeah,
yeah.
bronze.
Shafts and
The shafts and all that
we
were
would
always
put all
bronze.
bronze.
Well, I was spending the night with my Aunt Emma Davis in the big white house right across from the Methodist church. And we woke up and it was blowing, and I, being a kid, I didn't know what was going on. But then RB come to get us and took us to his house down on the street, and we were worse down there, but I mean, he wanted us there. Yeah, he had to have us there. So then as soon as he could, he took us to the school. But our house where I lived was not really damaged that bad.
Well, our house survived in good shape.
Ours did too.
And A. Nimmer's house did too, the big two-story house.
It blew out some windows in the house, and so we had water everywhere, of course, and the upstairs living room had linoleum, and when one of the windows blew out upstairs, I went upstairs to see what happened, and that linoleum was just waving like this on the living room floor because the wind had coming in through the window, got underneath that linoleum. Never will forget seeing it do that.
Well, in 1967, we were living on the street where the consignment shop is now, but it was just a one-story building then. And the building wasn't really destroyed because we had the water that year. It tore up a lot, but not like the 50 hurricane. But we had the beach sand in the front part of the house, and we had the mud from the bayou in the back of the house. That was in 67.
I think the interesting thing about talking about all the hurricanes, but that one in particular, is that it's another example of Cedar Key being isolated out here. We be kind of like the statue of the Phoenix. We rise out of disaster every time. Fortunately, many of our dads and people living in town were not only fishermen, they were boat builders, which means they were also carpenters. They built their own homes. So really, all they needed as soon as the hurricane was over was help from the Red Cross and other agencies to get materials, and they rebuilt themselves. I know my dad, with the help of his uncles, repaired all the damage to our home. And one of the first things I know they had to do, even though we didn't have water, like Francis explained, like we had in the tidal surge, we did have water in those low-lying areas because if you lost your roof, it was terrible. Rain just piled up in that. So the two houses, the one I lived in and our aunt's next door, first thing they did when they could get back in there was they bored holes in the floor to let the water out. And I know probably in that home are still the wooden pegs that our dad, plugged the holes with, because they were solid wood floors, and they're still there.
Speaking of rain, we had over 24 inches of rain in that hurricane.
So water damage was more from the rain than from the
there was 32 inches recorded in Yankeetown.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, in the 50 hurricane, it didn't do any damage to the city hall. It held pretty well, but it was just the building next over. But we didn't lose the roof, we didn't lose any windows, thanks to my mother and my grandmother.
Miss Minnie? Yeah.
I want y'all to tell us, in your graduating class at Cedar Key High School, how many students were in your graduating class?
8 in mine.
8?
13 in mine.
12 in the class that I would have graduated in.
Well, I think there was 12. There were 9 boys and 3 girls.
We did have one class, I've always been told, and during World War II, there was one class of one, Nolan Cannon. Because when the war started, those that were seniors enlisted or were drafted or whatever, went on and for whatever reason, maybe some physical disability, I don't know, Nolan didn't get asked to serve, so he graduated by himself.
And he later became the school bus driver.
Right, and our custodian.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could tell me who built and where was built the honeymoon shack or structures in the right off the beach island?
Mr. Phil Thomas built that. How it came to have the honeymoon, a name attached to it, is kind of a misnomer. I don't know how that got started, but it was Honey's Cottage because he called his wife Honey, and he called that Honey's Cottage.
Yeah.
And he built that in the middle 60s, somewhere around there. It was built after I graduated from high school.
It was really his guest house.
Yeah,
That's what
yes,
he-
or his getaway, some of the, Henry says, because he did a lot of odd jobs for Mr. Thomas, he says it was Mr. Thomas's getaway from hunting when he needed to. Because they had a mobile home, there's a beautiful stilt house that sits on that point now, just, you know, on the mainland from where the cottage was. But they had a mobile home, and that's what they, when they came down from Gainesville, that's where they stayed. But,
Yeah, it was destroyed in '85 and they wouldn't let her build back here.
right.
But they kept the little cottage out there. And it went through all the storms, not the '50s hurricane, but the '67,
Yeah.
'85 and '93.
It blew through it, yeah,
It
right.
just blew
Started
through it.
blowing up.
Since we have the Faraway Inn now, can you guys tell us anything? Was it the Faraway Inn when you were growing up? Was it just a vacant piece of land at that point?
Miss Madge Johnson and then put the first motel, the first motel there, but see, the road didn't go that way then. You could only go down the hill to get to it.
There was no G Street at the time.
No, ma'am, there was not.
No, we didn't have street names until when, the nineties, when they had to do the we've never had street names. When someone asked you where so-and-so lived, well, you go down this third street, and you go up past the, you know, in other words, you had to describe landmarks to direct people where to go, and we knew everyone who lived in all those houses, so we'd say, oh yeah, they live next door to this so-and-so, so it was interesting to give directions back then.
So what provoked the naming of the streets?
I guess the 911 system.
Okay, okay.
The streets
Well, they were already named.
Huh?
That you didn't have house numbers,
That's-
there were street names.
The streets.
The old plat. that
Yeah,
was
that's
back
right.
then.
Well, we didn't know them because
We
they
didn't-
didn't
we
have,
didn't-
have street signs.
yeah, we didn't have street signs, so we didn't know what they
Right.
meant.
No, because all of my life, the street, this First Street now was Front Street.
Right,
I mean,
that's
that's
on
what
the
the
old
old people
plan.
called it, was Front Street.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's all we knew of it.
Yes,
So those numbers are relatively new. I always wondered what the deal was. with
House
the
numbers.
house numbers.
house numbers.
Yeah,
You know, usually it's by
And
street
street
number,
signs
but
are
now
new,
it seems
'cause we
here,
didn't have
each number
street
is unique on the island. Is that how it works with the house numbers?
Yeah, that is fairly new.
No, the house numbers are not unique.
They're not.
Okay,
I can
they're
find
unique.
rhyme or rhythm
You
to
have to
how
have
they.
the house number and the street to know.
Oh, okay.
Some house numbers are on one street.
Post office usually gives you the number.
Yeah, it's just that they're like 16,250 or like
Well,
giant
they're
numbers.
based on how far you are from Bronson, the county seat, instead of how far you are from the city.
Oh.
No,
I just could never
They're
figure out
911.
how they determine, you know, most towns it starts with a
Well-
low number on that street and goes up, but here it seems like you could have two houses on the street and there'd be like 16,200, 16,202.
Well, the county wanted to make all of the streets big numbers, but the city of Cedar Key said no. So there are parts of what you think of as Cedar Key that are outside the city limits that have these huge numbers for the street. But in Cedar Key, you have First Street, Second Street, Third Street, because the city wanted to become part of that.
And see, I live at Kiss Me Quick, so mine's 12312 Bay Street. But I do live in Kiss Me Quick.
Can you tell us how those different areas receive their names?
That was a long time ago, I don't know. That was a long time ago.
I don't know, I live in Kiss Me Quick and the next little block over there is Hug Me Tight, so mine.
Well, I know what my grandmother said about it. That's when the train went through.
Yeah.
And they would slow down, and they say, kiss.
The conductor, or some of the people on the train had girlfriends that kissed me quick. And so the train would slow down or stop for them to get a quick kiss from their girlfriend.
So that, I mean, that's all I ever knew about it, but I wasn't gonna say that.
And the area down near Fenmore Mill, or going in that way, that was called Hungry Ben, right?
Hungry Ben.
Yep, right across from the park. Yeah.
That's where Minnie and Buddy.
Yeah, they never.
Buddy's house is in Hungry Ben.
Yeah.
And the house they had was before that was destroyed in the 1950 hurricane. Mr. and Miss Campbell lived there, and it was totally destroyed, and they rebuilt it. So.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about Boogie Ridge?
Well, that's located out there where the big blue, Marine Lab building is now. That little section out there called Havens Pass, I guess, where number 3 was
Haven Island.
Haven Island, it's really Haven Island. Yeah. I don't know why. I know there used to be a little bar.
There was a
out
bar there.
There was a bar there. And
Do you think it had begun before Prohibition, or was it?
It was after.
After Prohibition.
And that's what, I mean, people say, we're gonna go to Boogie Ridge, and I mean, that's the bar that was out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was always Havens Island. Havens Island, you know, because the Havens lived there, you know, before the bar came, the Havens lived there, so.
Well, another interesting thing about Cedar Key was when people go out of town and come back in, you know, I mean, just for the day, and everybody, before they went home, what we called, you got to do the dock.
Yeah.
We'd have to go uptown and ride all the way around the dock before we went home. And that's what we called do the dock, and I think they still do that to this day. They do.
Well, yeah, we ride around the dock, but the other unique thing about the pier before it was redone, and I guess that's why you might sense a little negative sentiment about the dock as it is today.
Yes, it is.
Because that was the gathering place. That was the social place, especially in the, when I grew up, we didn't have air conditioning in the home. So when it started getting hot weather in the evenings and through the summer, everybody in the community, just about, that could walk or drive a car, would go down and sometimes even bring their supper, their light supper, and sit on the dock. Some would fish, some would just sit there and visit. Kids could run around and up and down the dock and all over town. You know, that was just the place to gather. And can't do that today. No. Yes?
Did the train route follow Route 24 now, or where's that now?
Actually, it was a little south of the route of 24, right?
Yeah, parallel 24,
paralleled it.
Just a couple hundred yards to the south of 24.
Was 24, was that, I guess that was the first road and still the only basic road anyway?
There was a dirt road back in the 1800s that went to Chiefland before 24 was built. And you could only come and go on low tide.
Didn't have bridges.
No.
Were you guys, sorry. Were you guys in the same grade together? What grades, how far apart are you?
Well, I graduated in 46.
I graduated in 55.
I graduated in 62.
59.
So you all knew each other growing up?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We knew everybody in Cedar
Did you all get along growing up?
You couldn't get away with it.
You could not.
And talking about me having my boat, it was a rule and my boat was kept on the dock, right? The fish house I'm talking about is the fish house at the second bridge going out of town that is now has an apartment on top of it. That was Pete's Fish House, that was Daddy's. My boat was kept on the dock there, and I could take my motor and hook it onto the falls, which was the pulley mechanism, and get it out of the top of the fish house and put it down, put it on the boat. In other words, I could do it myself. And the only rule was when I left the dock, Daddy would say, my perimeter was don't go outside of Seahorse Key, North Key, or Seniotis. I think he knew all the time he was wasting his breath, but he didn't worry about that because all of the fishermen went in all those directions on, good fishing tides and whatever. And no matter where I went, by the time I got home, started to pull the thing on the dock, Daddy would just look down and he says, I thought I told you not to go out past Seahorse. So, called again. And the other rule was, I learned, the old motors, I mean, I'd go anywhere with the boat, whether I knew I had clear water or not, which meant over a number of oyster bars or whatever. But frequently, I would shear a pin on the motor. I mean, the wheel's gonna fall off, and you know. So I learned, I didn't, you know, the little shear pins, I didn't have a supply. I learned how to make one out of a bobby pin, which we always had in our hair, ponytail, bobby pins, so on. So, joke, Daddy used to say before I left the dock, he said, "You got enough bobby pins?" And usually when I came home with it, worked strapped together or fixed together with a bobby pin, then he'd put a new shear pin in it, whatever. But
Who taught you? Your father?
my brother and my father and all my uncles were fishermen, and
All the men that
all
hung around the
fish house,
there was
right?
a lot of
Yeah.
people there.
Were you one of the unique women that was interested in being out in the water all the time?
I don't know that I was unique, but
Did a lot of the
very much
girls?
tomboy then. I mean, you know, if the guys could have skiff boats and motors, and I didn't see any reason why I couldn't, you know. And so, like I said, to get me out from underfoot, they obliged. My brother and my dad did. Yes.
Could you give me a brief history of health care on the island? What's been available over
Look
the
at
years?
Well, when I was growing up, Dr. Jim Turner was a general practitioner that he didn't have an office. He practiced out of his home, and he delivered a lot of the babies in Cedar Key, and treated all the routine illnesses that people had. That was from the 1920s probably up until the late 40s or early 50s. And then we had another doctor, Dr. Middleton, that was here for a number of years. And I think there was another one that was here for a while after Dr. Middleton. I'm not sure. Was there one?
Well, Dr. Middleton was here when I was a kid, but primarily healthcare in town when I was growing up was Miss Garner.
Yeah,
Wow,
Miss Garner. Wow.
She was a nurse, but she lived on the island, and you needed shots, you needed stitches, you needed whatever, or if there was a death or somebody was near death, Miss Garnet was called.
Yeah, there was no physician here for many years.
Yeah, right.
And Miss Garnet really functioned pretty much as a physician's assistant does now. And she had relationships with physicians in Gainesville, including myself. And if I had a patient in Cedar Key that was having some problems, I would call her and ask her to go out and check them and see what it was, and then call me back, and I'd decide whether it was necessary for them to come to Gainesville to see me, or whether I could prescribe over the phone for them to save them a trip to Gainesville. So she really was an angel to Cedar Key for many years. Yeah.
Everybody.
We had no ambulance service either, so if there was an emergency, it was generally a local city policeman in his car that took you if you had no other transportation. And a lot of people didn't have
I'll tell you
their own transportation.
Excuse me, let me tell you one quick